Hello to you, my quiet quackers, and welcome to Bible History with Bear. I am Bear, your friendly neighborhood biblical historian, archaeologist, and scholar. We talk all things about the Bible and its history here, so if that sounds interesting, do all the good things like subscribe, etc., etc. Today we are continuing on with our story of Holy Week, and it is Spy Wednesday, and that means we're talking conspiracy and betrayal. Right, so on the Wednesday, according to the Synoptic Gospels, we see Judas going and meeting with the Jewish authorities and agreeing to betray Jesus. Now, why Judas does this is often up for debate. The Gospels tend to say that he was overtaken by Satan at this point. So that is Judas. But why would the Jewish authorities want Jesus done away with in the first place? Well, there are a number of different reasons for this, and we have touched briefly on some of the issues for the Jewish authorities in the past, but I'm going to lay out a few more here. So first and foremost, the Jewish authorities are put in place by the Romans. They are still under Roman authority. Whilst we might get the idea from reading the Old Testament that the position of high priest was one that was hereditary and safe, that is by no means true by the time we get to the Roman period. In fact, just in the period in which Rome is controlling Judea, we go through multiple high priests over a very short space of time. This is because Rome has no qualms in just deposing and in sometimes ousting completely a high priest if they are no longer beneficial to Rome, if they speak up against Rome, or if they can no longer keep the people in check. So the position of the high priest is very much as the go-between between the Romans and the Jewish people. This places them in somewhat of a precarious position, particularly given that we have a lot of people in the Jewish society at this point who are trying to overthrow the Romans or who want that as the ultimate goal. Together with the many messianic movements who are trying to create a kingdom of heaven on earth or to create a new kingdom for the Jews, this adds to the tension that exists. Again, we've talked about Passover last week, where we talk about the fact that the story itself creates this tension in the Jewish world. You have a story about freedom from foreign oppression whilst under an oppressive government. So this adds to this sort of tension that the Jewish authorities are trying to keep in check. So that's kind of where we find Caiaphas at this point. Caiaphas has been the longest reigning high priest for some time at this point. He is originally installed in 18 CE and doesn't leave office until 36 CE. His father-in-law, Annas, was previously the high priest, but he's deposed at the end of Augustus's reign. It's not entirely clear why he was deposed, but clearly he wasn't entirely out of sorts in that he was able to continue living. And in fact, several of his sons become high priest after Caiaphas. So there is that continuation of that line. But Caiaphas is the longest serving high priest, which means that he's very good at keeping this balance between Rome and the people. Not pissing off the people so much that they oust him, and not pissing off the Romans so much that they oust him. So that's basically how Caiaphas is trying to balance this out. Now, Jesus has already done several things which will have gotten the attention of Rome as well as gotten the attention of the Jewish authorities. He's had the triumphal entry with a bunch of people yelling revolutionary slogans and waving palm branches, which are a sign of Jewish independence. So that is already a red flag for the Jewish authorities. The following day, he goes to the temple and he's upturning tables and causing a fuss. Again, at the temple, we have Roman soldiers as well as temple police trying to keep everybody in check. And so we have this thing of these guys are noticing some behavior by Jesus, which is potentially going to cause an issue. And they want to get on top of that before it does cause an issue. But in the Gospels, we see them not wanting to necessarily make a move, particularly when Jesus is in crowds, because they don't want to potentially cause a riot by trying to arrest him or trying to make him leave the city. They don't want to have that issue in a crowded place, which is where Judas comes in. But what we really see here is this question of whether or not getting rid of this man is going to save the issue. So what we do have in the gospel accounts is, particularly in John, we have this idea of the Jewish authorities talking amongst themselves saying, we need to get rid of this man, otherwise Rome will come and get rid of us. And not just us in the sense of the authorities, although they may have been scared for their particular positions in society, but also for the entire nation. They are scared that the Romans will get rid of the temple itself if they can no longer control it, and the Jewish people as a whole. So that is the fear that is driving Caiaphas and the other Jewish authorities. This idea that if we don't stop this one man, we could lose the whole nation. So that is the reason that we see, particularly in John, as the reason for the Jewish authorities going against it. Now, we also see from the various things that they ask him that Jesus is in fact potentially quite guilty of the things that they say. Now, whether we would see him as guilty in the same way that they would is a different debate. But certainly, if you accused him of having said that the destruction of the temple is nigh and potentially saying that the temple should be destroyed, then there are certainly enough statements by Jesus to back this up. He's called the temple a den of thieves. He's turned over the tables, and he's also said that not a single stone will stand on one place. So this is clearly a provocation against the temple, which was in fact illegal in Jewish law. We also have him again associated with various things which would upset the Romans. But the Caiaphas himself asks him whether he is the Messiah. And Jesus responds with quotes from biblical texts which talk about the Son of Man or the Messiah. This is not, strictly speaking, an admission or a denial. But even if Jesus had admitted it, this would have been a crime. You can't declare yourself the Messiah. You're not allowed to do that in Jewish law. But you also have this issue of even if he said he was, even if it is true, he is still guilty. So the Jewish authorities have plenty of reason to have him arrested, to have him contained. They're also very scared that he may be leading the Jewish people astray. Now, we can question what exactly they mean by that, right? What the gospel writers were trying to say about the Jewish authorities and why they were scared about Jesus leading these people astray. Were they scared because they were trying to protect their own religion and the way that that was practiced and perceived going forward, right? Or were they trying to preserve it because they knew he was right and they were trying to keep all of these people from finding out the truth? That's sort of the discussion that gets had mainly, and I think in general there has been this sort of feeling that the Jewish authorities knew that Jesus was the Messiah, but they were trying to hide it and trying to get rid of him because, otherwise people would find out. And I don't believe that that is entirely true. I think that they were probably working from a position in which they, at least, firmly believed that they were doing the right thing. That in getting rid of this one man, they could save the nation. And this argument gets brought up again in our own times, whether, the loss of one person is to save many is better or worse. But it is still a question that we have to ask ourselves in many cases, particularly in political cases. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Could removing a leader help with quelling a movement? Or should we just let it play out? And depending on where you side on that movement or where you fit politically, you're going to have different views on that. Yes, saving the world because you get, we all have this sort of thing of, oh yeah, we go back in time and shoot the mustache man before he can do all his mustachy things. But again, that's a sort of argument of, well, if you get rid of the leader, do you kill the movement? And that's sort of what they're trying to decide here. But they certainly don't want to start any potential riots or whatever by arresting Jesus in public, which is why they are sneaky about it and go to Judas in order to get him to betray them. Caiaphas is acting at least in his best interest in some ways, because if Jesus does start a riot, or the people start a riot because of what Jesus is saying, then Caiaphas is likely to lose his position. But equally, Caiaphas may be working from a position of it is better to get rid of one man than to lose all of them. It's difficult to properly say, but I do think that we need to be at least understanding of the difficult position that these people were in. Oftentimes we forget that and we just sort of blame the Jewish authorities for bringing Jesus to trial, bearing in mind that they couldn't in fact kill him at this stage. At this point in Roman history, at least Roman Judean history, these guys have lost the ability to exact capital punishment. So even if they had wanted to have Jesus killed, they did not have the authority to declare that. That is why when he is eventually taken to trial, we'll see the actual reasons he is put to death are very different than the ones he's originally brought in for. He's originally brought in for blasphemy, for making statements about the destruction of the temple, but he ends up being killed because he's king of the Jews. Very different understanding of what that means for both of these groups. But we'll go more into the trial in coming days. But this is part of the reason why Caiaphas and the other Jewish authorities would have been motivated, at least, to have Jesus taken out of the picture. So there you go. The more you know. Like, subscribe, follow, all those good things. And I can't wait to talk to you again about some more about the Bible and its history with me, Bear. Bye-bye.